God, I hope the air traffic control PCs weren't using CrowdStrike, because that really would have, you can imagine all sorts. So yes,
Yeah,
you're absolutely right.
yeah,
Absolutely. Hence my, reset of governance. They need to think more broadly now.
yeah, yeah. I know somebody who works there, and yeah, I won't say anything more. Hello and welcome to the Cloud Therapist channel. I'm Richard Simon. Welcome to the August episode of Cloud State of Play. As ever, I have the exceptional Paul Bevan with me again, and again, because he comes over every month. So we always have the same greeting.
I'm always available.
Indeed. So Paul is the Director of Research for Infrastructure at Bloor Research. How are you doing? How are you coping with the weather?
Oh, fine. I don't mind it too much, but it's yeah. I wish we had more of it. I think it's probably been so
Yeah.
cold and wet most of the time that you
Yes.
make the most of it when it comes along. And then of course we complain because it's too hot.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So for
Typically,
those,
typically British, dear boy. The weather's never right.
yes, so for those of you who are international, the UK has about 2 weeks of decent weather, and we're in the middle of it right now. Okay, right. So Paul, for the August episode, we said we would look at again. We have three more topics as usual. So we have the first one is the CrowdStrike. What happened to the CrowdStrike incident? What happened at the CrowdStrike incident? So that's the first one. The second one, we have an article that came out on the new stack called Cloud Migration Regrets. Should you repatriate? So that's an interesting one. We have a lot, I think, to say on that. I certainly do. And the third one is a survey by HashiCorp and Forrester called the State of Cloud Strategy Survey 2024. So we're kind of going to go from the disaster to what should we do about it and how can we mitigate that to, is our strategy ready? I think that's the overall theme for this month. Okay, so Paul, CrowdStrike, what the boop happened?
Oh, well, for me as an analyst, it was interesting because, first you had to get into what physically happened. And that's intriguing. I probably learned more about the kernel and, Windows operating system than really
more than we cared to know. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, it was like, oh, do I really, but there were some interesting technical things that came out of that. But the one that really struck me more than anything else was the implications for business and the fact that business has probably never really viewed the end user device as a sort of mission critical tool. It's almost like your PC falls over. Well, okay, someone come along and fix it. It'll be another way to get on. Nobody ever, I don't think a lot of companies, and the one or two notable exceptions, really thought, what happens if I lose my whole, PC estate or my whole end user estate? Doesn't matter how good my resiliency is and my recovery is of back-end systems, because that's where the focus tends to be. Actually, your end user device these days is a critical piece of your infrastructure. And I think an awful lot of people have missed that. So I think there's a sort of wake-up call for businesses. I mean, it was interesting to watch people trying to recover. And there were one or two notable exceptions of companies that seem to recover pretty quickly. I mean, a couple of the American airlines, I think it was Delta and American, or it might have been Delta and United, seem to get their systems back up quickly. And I'm not quite sure why. I mean, there's very little detail coming out about how we did. What a piece of detail I did get was around a large, well-known retailer. And I can say no more because I shall drop my my source in it if it gets. But they only implemented the CrowdStrike update for half their EPOS devices.
Right.
And they were going to see how that went. And so they lost half their EPOS devices, but the stores didn't close down because half of them were still working.
Right.
You know, and so there was an element of some companies had understood they needed to mitigate the potential risks. Others seem to have been completely caught unawares by this. And I think it's, you know, it's back to everybody has sort of focused and almost sort of laser focus on what are critical systems, and they tend to be the applications and the back-end applications. And nobody's actually gone, what happens if we lose all our end user devices? You know, ATM networks going down, EPOS devices going down, you know, booking in systems at airports because they're all PC oriented going down, all those sort of issues. You think, my goodness me. And so this is back to the fact, I think, that by and large, businesses don't really get to grips with what are the critical systems I need to support and why. You know, what are the ones that if it goes, I go out of business, you know, and how quickly can I get it back? And I just think generally business right across the piece is quite poor at risk management and risk mitigation. And I think this has just highlighted that again in absolute spades.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we weren't obviously going through all the sort of technical details of it. There's plenty of sort of people out there. There's actually a couple of videos. A guy on YouTube has put out, he's an ex-Microsoft engineer, I believe, called Dave Plummer. So we'll try and provide some details on that. He actually goes through it fairly, you know, in a sort of short amount of time, kind of explains the problem. But essentially, it's because the CrowdStrike agent, shall we say, is you know, acts as a device driver. It operates in the kernel space, and because it's digitally signed by Microsoft, it's trusted. However, updates coming to it, which can also be in the form of, you know, code, were not necessarily part of that digitally signed, you know, agreement with Microsoft. And I think that's really what's caused the, you know, what's caused the problems.
The irony is, or appears to be, that, you know, for those updates, which are, they call either channel updates or template updates, don't need to go through the sort of strict routine of checking for a proper software update, you know, of the whole system. They use a debugger. And the irony is there was a bug in the debugger. You know, I mean, it's the unknown unknowns, isn't it? I mean, it had the same, there've been 2 updates before that for the, you know, the verified system, 2 updates that went through, you know, on the channel or the template updates without any problem at all, because the code to do that didn't have any bugs in it, or didn't have the bugs that the debugger didn't find, you know. And it was one of those classic ones. I mean, but again, the argument there is, as much as anything else, is why do we need to actually get inside the kernel? You know, I mean, there's a much wider question, which is probably not for today, is why on earth do we need to be playing around with inside the kernel? Yeah, I'm sure there'll be arguments around performance and security and all those sort of issues. But the reality is, if you start messing around inside a kernel, you're going to cause yourself problems downstream.
Yeah, I mean, it acts as a device driver. So I can appreciate that kind of needs to be there as soon as the, you know, the OS is starting, the kernel is starting. But I think there should be probably a kind of a two-way approach to, you know, if you're running in user mode, then you get digitally signed. But if you're running in kernel mode, maybe you get digitally signed or something. You know, it's kind of a little bit more scrutiny on those types of, you know, on that type of code that's running in the kernel mode.
Yeah, I think I think there's got to be a sort of understanding that actually accessing kernel mode for anything other than the, you know, the basic operating system is something you should keep to an absolute minimum.
Yeah.
You know, and yeah, we go back to that. So, but no, I think fundamentally it just highlights how little understanding I think businesses have of the implications and risks that they face of not understanding how their technology is supporting their business and what happens when it goes down. Because if they'd known that, they would have had some other, and some did, and there'll be good ones. But obviously, very hard for us to get real sort of evidence as to who failed and who didn't fail. You want a much more honest debate around, oh blimey, we lost all our end user devices and it took us forever and we had to manually rebuild every one of them. Oh dear, what a disaster. And other companies going, well, no, I had various automations in place and mitigations that said we didn't lose them all. Unless you share those, other businesses are just going to go, oh, they'll point the finger at CrowdStrike or at Microsoft and go, you so-and-sos
Well,
and carry on as normal, which I think is criminal.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think because people were seeing the Windows, OS sort of failing, then everybody was pointing the finger at Microsoft initially, and there was a lot of conflation, sort of in the press as well, because we couldn't tell what the percentage split was between client machines and server machines, and because and end users can only see their own machines and their own POS systems, as you said, and booking terminals, whatever they are, they would assume that it's only affecting the client machines, whereas actually we don't know whether something similar was applied to server machines in the data center. But because those are not visible, we don't know what this percentage split was.
And obviously the numbers are very different too. So your server goes down, and okay, you have to reboot it manually and in safe mode if you can do that with a server. I'm not that way inclined, but if you can do that manually, then you're talking about tens of servers or maybe hundreds at most. You're talking about thousands for each individual organization of these end user devices. So it's I think you just need to think, hold on a minute, this isn't about the application at the back end, this is about actually losing all access to them through your terminals.
And again, I don't know. I mean, I assume that the majority of servers running Windows Server would be virtual machines these days, even in the data center or whatever. So that's fine. But again, we don't know, like I said, how many of them were affected, what the percentage split was between server machines, Windows Server and Windows 10 or Windows 11.
There's a lot of learnings that need to come out of that. But as I say, I'm much more focused on getting business leaders and senior business people to really sit down with IT and say, let's work out what are the things that are going to kill us if it stops, and how do we mitigate that? And I just think there's and we've been arguing this for God, as long as IT's been around, that better understanding and better cooperation between business leaders, and IT leaders. Business leaders go, well, it's your problem, you go away and deal with it. And that's unfair on IT, and yet IT struggles to communicate in the sort of terms that business leaders have. That's nothing new, but my God, this had an impact this time, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. And also I think the problem is that, there was obviously a lot of misinformation in the press, but I was looking at it from a technical point of view, and I was thinking, okay, well, do these organizations not have recovery, processes for, using things like WinPE or the Preinstall Environment, which you can use through PXE Boot and Wake-On-LAN and stuff like that, and then you just need to really pass through the BitLocker key, the encryption key, because obviously you need to decrypt the drive in order to address the problem. So I assume that most companies that were affected had something like that, or put together, rigged something like that very quickly, to make it happen. One interesting point is that we now kind of have a good idea of who CrowdStrike's customers are. So the customer list got revealed in the press inadvertently because they were all screaming and their customers were screaming in turn.
Yeah, I mean, CrowdStrike's been so successful in the past 2 or 3 years. I mean, it's taken that particular part of the security market by storm. Because most people say it's a great product. But again, how do you mitigate the risk? Do you need multi vendor strategy? Some of it surprise. The other thing that you say conflated. I remember early days, and I thought you were probably going to blow a gasket was, they were pointing at it being a cloud problem. And you go,
yes, I was going to bring that up actually, because you and I spotted an article in CIO, I think, magazine or something. By I think somebody called Guyana Swain.
Well, it was very much coming out of their Indian sort of region. It was strange, but it was sort of pointing the finger at cloud. You're thinking, really?
And the funny thing with the articles, and I will provide a link for this, by the way, because it is quite amusing. The stock picture in the article was of a person smiling in the data center.
I know.
And I thought, hang on, that's not.
So yeah,
the price is not a smiling, session.
As usual, everybody wants to react quickly and say, "Oh, it's this or it's that." There was an awful lot of finger pointing going on.
I found it, to be honest with you, a very irresponsible piece of journalism. Things like it said, and I'm quoting now: "Expose the fragility of cloud-dependent systems, where a single point of failure can have cascading effects." What cloud systems and what single point of failure?
Actually, it was, as you say, it was
irresponsible. It got to do with the cloud.
It was uninformed. It was irresponsible. Didn't help with the overall argument. As you say, I think obviously CrowdStrike themselves will be looking at their own process and procedures. Microsoft will have to think about how they give access to the kernel and how do they, as you say, validate what's going through. Do they have to do it for and you get this sort of trade-off between speed and security. A lot of these template updates are to match new security threats. Therefore, they've got to do them fairly quickly, and therefore the Microsoft validation process for anything accessing the kernel for a proper update takes quite some time. So again, all these challenges. Business just needs to be aware of those challenges and the extra risks that they bring, and say, how do I mitigate that? Not, I don't, well, I'm going to say it wasn't the case of they weren't very good at risk management. I just don't think many organizations had even really considered how mission critical their PCs were.
Yeah. And in fact, if, in order to kind of, or if organizations have done it differently, mitigating it through things like cloud VDI, for example, would have actually, helped in that process. If they actually put, their end user systems or the client machines into a VDI environment running in the cloud, that should have been easier for them to, to restore from that, to recover back to a decent image. I just found some of the, some of the information out there quite, it was utter garbage, to be honest with you. I just found it really, I was quite furious, I think, about a couple of the articles, and the claims were, not only ludicrous but a complete jump to conclusions as well. And we were right smack in the middle of it at that point,
as you say, they were. But again, it's all part of the same cycle that we get into, isn't it? That react quickly and consider the implications later. It's just. In a number of spheres, but it was disappointing, I must admit, the whole thing, which is why I wanted to get away from the technical side. So that blog I wrote was really aimed at business people to say, just wake up, guys, and start collaborating at the right level with your IT departments.
And we'll come to your blog for a minute. I just wanted to point something else out. Somebody on LinkedIn put out the usual, well, if you are running Linux, this wouldn't have happened to you. So I gave him a piece of my mind.
I saw that,
and I said yes, because of course 2024 is the year of Linux on the desktop, isn't it? So,
but also the fact,
and I got a few likes for that as well. So
but also the fact that Linux had suffered from
exactly,
and so it just happened that this particular one hit Windows. The Linux one, as you say, not so many Linux desktops, so it doesn't make much difference. Apple are the only ones who seem to be sort of getting away with it, but then they've got a real sort of walled garden approach, and it's quite difficult to, which has its benefits, but also has its drawbacks. So.
It did. There was I think, article in the Register because the update, the CrowdStrike update for Linux a few months ago, broke Red Hat, broke Debian, and broke Rocky Linux as well, as far as I know. So there was an article on that, which I will provide a link for in the description. So yeah, I mean, it just really it didn't make any sense. Now, one thing I wanted to kind of explore was whether people, because and I think you mentioned this in your article, people talk a lot about DR, and kind of that sort of balance between sort of having a DR strategy and obviously not having one. But if you have one, it's a lot of money spent, and it's kind of you blow your budget, and then maybe it will happen to you, where you will need to instigate the DR, and maybe you won't, you don't. So it's like a lot of money spent on that. So one thing I thought about was, why aren't some of those DR strategies taking advantage, a lot more advantage of kind of cloud native technologies, things like serverless and infrastructure as code, for example, where you're not upfront, apart from the research, of course, and and the testing, you're not really investing in any type of quote unquote infrastructure, be it physical or virtual in the cloud, upfront. So it's not sitting there twiddling thumbs waiting for your production environment to fail so that your production can fail over, but it's kind of instigated at the point of failure when it's needed. So you stand up that serverless environment for your most critical, sort of line of business applications. That becomes your new production environment until you recover your standard production environment, which is maybe a little bit more of a settled environment. It's like your standard environment running in instances or containers or whatever. But if that was to fail, let's not try and recreate it all or have it sitting somewhere on standby, but actually through serverless be able to recreate it on the fly instantly. Yes, you'll lose maybe a few minutes or an hour or two of your services, but that's better than days worth of and weeks worth of of failure or downtime.
But I think you've just nailed it there to an extent, is the sense that it's then up to the business to say, how long can I survive without this?
Yeah.
How long before it does me serious damage? If you're in financial trading in the city and you're dealing shares and futures and God knows what, milliseconds can cost you, millions of pounds, millions of dollars. So there will be a different level of that. And the other thing I always suggest, and it shows my age, is that disaster recovery is quite separate from building resilient recoverable systems. Quite different. And people can again conflate the two.
Yeah.
Disaster recovery is, you've lost your whole data center, guys.
It's all gone.
It's gone. Your office, you've lost your office. Again, disaster recovery. If your office with all the PCs in is burnt down, where'd you go and how do you do that? It's a very, I mean, in the new world of working from home, maybe that's not so much of an issue as it used to be in the old days. But no, I think that the challenge is, how do I build resilient, recoverable systems, which is what mainframes were all about in the old days. Again, it was, what you could tell the ones that were good because they failed over to the last transaction, without even blinking, to somewhere else, But hey, let's not go down that route. But you were right. I mean, can you use serverless and can you use those?
It's just a different way of doing your DRs. And I appreciate what you're saying about having a resilient architecture. And yes, with cloud and multi-cloud, and so on, you can do that, and things like chaos engineering being built in, and so on, and having more of the cloud native sort of techniques, for development, and also for goodness sake, even for the rollout of updates, like A/B testing or canary testing, stuff like that. That's the whole point. That's why we have those things. I can't believe that people still haven't sort of implemented that. But okay, so just going back to your article, I like the bit where you said there's a kind of a reset in corporate governance and risk management. That was quite an interesting thing. And obviously you guys advocate for mutable business sort of approach quite a lot. designed as a kind of, with change in mind, designed with change in mind, right? So get a little bit more about that. What's kind of your view on those things that you said?
Again, at the moment, risk management and this whole sort of governance of risk within an organization is something that you sort of look at periodically, and then it's very much it's a sort of tick box. It's become a tick box exercise. Have we got, do we know what the risks are? Do we know how likely it is to happen? What's the impact of them? What are the mitigations? And then you suddenly find that, it's easy to do the easy mitigations, and they tend to be for the things that are not that critical. The ones that are, they don't happen very often, but my God, when they do, it's critical, tend to be quite complex and expensive in terms of ensuring that because you're doing something in the likelihood that it's never going to happen.
Yeah.
And back to my argument, I think I put in there that none of us like, buying insurance, because every year you get the end of year insurance, you have to redo your insurance, and nothing happened the year before. You think, oh God, have I got to spend money on that again? And so this whole issue, the governance piece, has almost got to that point where it's going, well, it's never happened. It's not likely to happen. And they forget but when it does, you're out of business routine. They forget that how. So the reset needs to be, don't just focus on how often it's going to happen. You absolutely need to understand how critical that is to your business and how quickly you would go out of business. It may only happen once in a lifetime. Are we going to see another CrowdStrike one like that? Well, not completely like that, I should think. If there was, the CrowdStrike people would probably go out of business. But it's that sort of reset, because I think too many risk registers in organizations have become tick box exercises. Oh yes, and you can say, oh, we're doing all these mitigations, and when you look at the what they're doing is they're ticking off the easy ones. We improved 30 things last month or last quarter or wherever, however often they review it, and we make sure that this doesn't happen. And you look back and think, well, they're all the ones that were easy to do, where where it happens quite regularly, and the implication is very, very, very little. You think, why did you even bother doing the mitigations? Because actually recovering from them is so bloody easy. Excuse my French.
And also, I think, I like the bit that you said about focusing on outcome, not output. Having an outcome sort of approach, not an output-based approach to things as well.
Yeah, it again, too many things are stats are based on how many things you've done rather than what outcomes you get. And I'm sure we'll come on to that in our next pieces.
We definitely will. Excellent. Okay, so that was CrowdStrike. And I think just one last point, I think from me, is that because our sort of Western economy and society in general has kind of, got a lot more globalist, if you like, anything small somewhere is affecting lots of other things. And I don't mean just from a technical point of view, but just from, people trying to, get on their plane to go on their holiday type of thing. It affects much more people, these sorts of things, than it used to do in the past. In the past, if British Airways went down in the 80s, it was just British Airways that went down in the 80s. But now, potentially you could have this type of thing that addresses multiple, systems and multiple organizations, could easily take them all down. Hey, if you are enjoying the content, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That would really help me out. Thank you. Okay, right. Let's move on to the second topic. So the new stack had an article out called Cloud Migration Regrets. Should you repatriate? Okay, I don't know about you, but I'm going to lay my cards on the table with this article. I found it very disappointing and also slightly misleading in certain areas. That was my view of it. It's written by a guy called Rick Clark. Now, he claims to have 20 plus years in cloud, open source security experience. He's actually apparently one of the people, or the person, for developing Ubuntu server. I don't know why that's a pioneering thing, but he seems to claim it's a pioneering thing. He's He's working for UST Evolve, which is a digital transformation outfit. And he's been field CTO at VMware and Pivotal prior to that. Not sure that's something you want to be happy with, but there you go. It's advertised. And he was at Rackspace, where he developed the Rackspace Cloud, and his profile said, where I also founded OpenStack as well. So I think that says enough.
Other people might want to challenge that particular one.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I actually had that interview with UST Global a few years ago, but yeah, not very impressed with how they were running things. But anyway, yeah, so it's filed under FinOps on the new stack section. And it says many enterprises are reevaluating their cloud migrations. And it says, is this due to trying to make the most of the investment, or due to kind of cost management? I don't know. That's my question, by the way. But they're saying that many people are reevaluating their cloud migrations.
And I think, that in itself is hardly surprising. I mean, because cloud has the use of cloud has accelerated, and we've seen and talked about areas where cloud costs have not been brought under control, and whose fault was that, and where's it coming from? So I didn't find that bit particularly surprising that companies were doing that. I think the thing that was disappointing from my perspective was that they were making too much of the fact that you should be thinking of repatriating, rather than thinking, should I have migrated those in the first place? There was almost, and we saw, particularly during COVID, quite a rush of companies almost sort of throwing legacy systems into the cloud, lift and shift, wrap them in a container and throw them into the cloud type approach. And so again, it's back to the strategy piece, isn't it? It's back to, what is your strategy for doing this? How clearly do you understand what you need to do with your systems of record? It's, you just keep coming back to the fact that where this is taking place is not so much the fault of cloud, it's the fault of the lack of strategic thinking, the lack of understanding about what they've got to do. I mean, you can throw a few brickbats at the likes of AWS and Google and Azure and things, and say, you made it very complicated in terms of pricing. You tried to move away from what I call a sort of function as a service, almost to a, have some the reserved instances ones, and again, so you put the capacity planning right back onto the people who thought they just got rid of capacity planning by going to the cloud, and suddenly they were not using their instances properly. They were over provisioning again. You can argue that was a bit naughty of the cloud providers, but it was very remiss of the other, of the actual end users going, oh, well, I've just got rid of all that. I don't need to worry about capacity management anymore or capacity planning. Yeah. Oh boy, how wrong were you? So we can see the cloud still growing. There will be on-premises systems for some time to come, systems of record. The question is, how do you update those with new technology before you then put them into the cloud? Yeah. I mean, I think that's the point. People think, oh, I'll put it into the cloud and then I'll update it. Most systems of record, that's going to be a recipe for failure. Yeah. Absolute recipe for failure. So I was probably not quite as annoyed as you were, because I thought, yeah, a lot of the underlying is right, but nonetheless, it's a disappointing approach, because it's still trying to say to people, hey, think about repatriation. No, think about how you migrate, when you migrate, and how you do it. All those sort of questions that I know you espouse.
I think it seems to kind of spit in the face of cloud, but then say, well, actually, it's not really that bad though, sort of approach. So, so that was kind of the confusing bit that I found. And a lot of the things, and I'll mention a couple of examples in a minute, it seemed to kind of twist or turn the topic around. So the article refers to another one from November last year, and that one is adapting legacy development and IT processes, talks about that. So that's kind of your cloud operating model approach. The second point, or the top, is kind of list out the top reasons. So one of those is adapting legacy and development and IT processes. That's kind of really your sort of operating model. The second reason says this training and education development of teams. That's kind of moving to DevOps and reskilling. And the third one answer there was a kind of a mishmash of testing, deployment, monitoring processes, and things like that. But just coming back to this one, it does mention correctly things like CapEx versus OpEx, and that's fine. So that's kind of it hits the nail on the head there, but doesn't seem to kind of elaborate on that. But there seems to be let me quote this particular sentence. It says the transition was more complex than anticipated and often took much longer. Once migrations were completed, the costs were significantly higher than on-prem. So yes, but again, we're kind of looking at it from the end result, the symptoms of it, and not the from the results of what happened in these migrations, and especially the very early adopters of cloud, versus how you ought to be using cloud, what how your strategy should be, around cloud. And then it goes on, so it re-impacts that by saying how cloud failed to live up to expectations or whatever. And I think that's not just overtly pessimistic, but unsympathetic as well as a statement.
Yeah, again, you can take these at face value and get annoyed about them. I mean, it was interesting because they had this section that said cloud technology is disconnected from the business, and again, it comes back to this.
I picked up on that as well.
Yeah, this sort of there is a disconnect between the way in which cloud has been marketed and the way in which vendors who are not genuine cloud vendors have jumped on the fact that they're cloud, and plenty of that's been going on.
Yeah.
And the fact that cloud, and I've banged on about this so often, I'm sure I'm getting boring, is cloud is a consumption mechanism. There's some underlying technologies that make that work better. And that's really what it's about, getting those underlying technologies to work and the processes, whether it's, agile and all those sort of processes with the new technologies and the containerizer, all those sort of things. But cloud itself is used as this sort of catch-all for anything that isn't on premises. And you just think this is no wonder it's not lived up to the expectation, because the hype coming out, and I'm not even blaming the three big public cloud providers. I'm providing everybody else who jumped on the bandwagon and said, hey, we've got to go to the cloud, without thinking what's involved or what actually they're providing, and as I say, I think there's been so much where people have said, oh, well, I've got a cloud solution. And when you look at it, you're going, that's a managed service, or that's an old-fashioned outsourcing. That's not cloud.
Yeah, and also, I mean, we've argued about sort of is SaaS cloud in the past as well, and a lot of stuff, could have gone that way. But one other quote on there was, it says, the cloud feels like a black box because it hides its true financial cost. I would actually argue the opposite of that. In fact, if anything, public cloud bills are actually too transparent. They're almost like, and he does argue about it. Well, every little, vCPU that was enabled and disabled is listed in the Yeah, that's called transparency. That's what the cloud service providers are actually, there's hyperscalers. That's what they're doing, because there were complaints initially about the bills not being transparent. Now they're fully transparent. What the problem is I think, is that people are looking at that and either getting overwhelmed by all the details because they don't have a mechanism, a FinOps approach, or or they haven't involved their finance team in order to actually to be able to, mask a lot of that sort of level of detail and actually just kind of give you the bottom line of what is required. But that was done because the cloud service providers, the hyperscalers, wanted to be fully transparent. And it's only when we're actually seeing that kind of stark, full price breakdown, are we then kind of balking at the bottom line and saying, well, this is too expensive in comparison with my data center. Yeah, because in your data center, you didn't really get this level of transparency. We didn't even maybe think about it or even search for it. But now that you're getting it, you're actually seeing it, in full black and white.
I mean, the other thing that's come into play, I mean, there's two things that also come into play, which maybe are not quite so positive from your perspective, but I think we need to sort of recognize them. One is the complexity of the offers that you get from the big cloud providers, seemingly to do very similar things. And it's interesting. I noticed there was an article that came out of the Corey Quinn's newsletter about how AWS were retiring a whole number of services, which is something that they've never done. They've literally, once they run up a service, it stays there forever, or that's the way people thought. And actually, they're going through and doing some housekeeping, which I think is a good idea. But very complex environments, but also, again, lack of control from within businesses, because it was so easy for the developers just to run up new systems and leave them running. Again, so and again, there was this this idea that took hold that said, once we've given it to the public cloud provider, I don't need to worry about all those operational details, and then suddenly your finance guys are going, hold on a minute, this is costing us an arm and a leg. And it's not the fault of the cloud, it's the fault of, not abrogating responsibility to somebody else. It's when you go to the cloud, your responsibilities change, but you've still got as many responsibilities as you had before.
Yeah.
And back to and I think I've used this one before, a big European bank, when the IT department was being hit with, clouds costing us too much money, got the finance people to look at, are you looking at it purely from, a transactional outputs point of view? What about the outcomes? They hadn't looked at outcomes at all. And this was to do with, sort of data searches and analytics and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. They were going, yes, we're running, 10 times more analytics than we ever did in the past. So yes, that's obviously at a transactional point of view, that's going to cost more money. What are we getting out the far end of that? Oh, okay, right, okay, and then go around. So again, the disconnect between IT and the business again is, IT is doing this and providing it, and the business is not coming back and saying, yeah, actually, our outcomes are much, much better now because we've got all this better, faster, more agile data coming at us, analysis coming at us.
Yeah, and he also goes on to blame lift and shift for that. Or that's one of the other symptoms that he sees. So again, for me, it's a yes and no, as far as I'm concerned. So yes, that companies kind of got stuck. Once they kind of lifted and shifted their workloads, they stuck. They didn't move on from that. They thought, that's it. That is the cloud. We're now in the cloud, and we're, our job is complete. So obviously, there's more advantages of cloud that they could have sort of moved on to. And really, as I keep telling my customers, it's a journey, and lift and shift is kind of really the first stage of four. In fact, I've actually spoken about this in another video, so I'll provide some details of that, which I did do earlier this year, and talk about the kind of what I would call the 4 stages of migration to cloud. And so that's kind of the yes side, but the no side for me is because sometimes enterprises really get forced into doing a lift and shift, whether that's your data center contractors closing, whether you get a new CIO, CTO that makes kind of bold decisions, whether it's, through pandemics or something like that, where there isn't nobody to support and you have to kind of digitize things very quickly. So sometimes not what I'm saying. It's not kind of that clear cut. I think the initial adopters, yes, fell into that trap of kind of just lifting and shifting and saying, well, that's it. We're finished now. We're in the cloud, right? But subsequently, I think we've had things like, people migrating for the wrong reasons, as we've talked about in the past, as well as, more immediate things that have kind of, forced them down that road, like, the pandemic and lockdowns and stuff like that. So again, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
So I think, and maybe I'm slightly at odds with you in one sense, is that I don't think, if you want to take a systems of records, most of these lifts and shifts are systems of record, aren't they? I mean, that's effectively what you're bringing across, is modernize them on premises using cloud-like tools, using all the digital native tools. Because the minute you put it in there, you put it into the cloud, or you try and redevelop parts of it into the cloud and leave parts of it, on premises, you create all sorts of other problems. I'd say create your own private cloud on premises to test out what this looks like. And then, because your own private cloud's probably doesn't scale as well, it's probably more expensive to run than putting it into AWS or Azure or GCP or any of the others. So do that first before you put the cloud. Don't lift and shift and then try and do the modernization in the cloud. Put new applications into the cloud, yeah, absolutely. Develop in the cloud, absolutely. But taking an existing system of record, putting it into the cloud, and then working on it is a recipe for disaster in my mind.
Yeah, and then you kind of moves on to talk about enterprises not rewriting their applications. I mean, again, that's not really the cloud's fault. That's a strategy failure. So, and cloud being disconnected from business, we talked about that. Okay, it kind of, I guess, makes sense to a certain degree, but not entirely. And then he said, there's another statement that said, moved a lot of the decisions from the business to the technology group. But again, fails to mention what those decisions were that kind of moved from the business to the tech, to the IT team. And then again, complaining about sort of cloud bills being too detailed doesn't mean much to the business. But again, it's not for the business. The business side of it should not be worried about the bills. It's the FinOps team, if you have one, and if you don't have one, we're back to the strategy not being right. In your enterprise. And again, there was talk about visibility and traceability of costs was lost. And I don't think, I think in the data center, you didn't have that in the first place. It wasn't there.
You didn't. I mean, one of the big challenges always was understanding the true cost of running a data center.
Exactly. And it's, people still don't know what that is. Yeah. And then the other aspect of it, which I kind of see from a certain point of view, about blaming DevOps. So it's the development or developer autonomy. Spin up sort of cloud resources, free to use the kind of the latest and most fanciest, sort of technologies and so on in the cloud. Yes, but again, that goes back to your strategy and your FinOps approach on how, or cloud cost management and how you do that.
And
right?
and we'll come on to it in the next piece. Is where are the good companies actually winning, and they're doing it because they've got a fairly clear view of what they're trying to do, and the DevOps teams sit within a much more structured environment now that interoperates with the rest of the business. Yeah,
and then there was another. Sorry, I just found the article quite amusing. It said, and I quote, "It is a trap that enthusiasts." This is about the development autonomy, developer autonomy. It is a trap that enthusiasts and true believers in the cloud, like me, can easily fall into. So, if you're a true believer in the cloud, why are you falling for any of that stuff? That's a really weird statement to make. If you kind of already know what you're doing as a true believer, I don't understand how you can then fall into into the trap. But anyway, okay. Yeah, I just find that strange.
I think we could have fun with that one, but probably a bit of a rabbit hole to go down.
Yeah. Okay. So it goes on to, should we repatriate? So it says many CTOs and CIOs. This is a quote again. Many CTOs and CIOs are considering repatriation. Yeah. Okay. Who? You'd care to name any names? Any large sort of recent organizations that have done that? I mean, I don't know, but at least he stopped short of mentioning DHH and Amazon Shopping again, which is the two poster childs for repatriation that every Tom, Dick, and Harry mentions. So I don't know.
The problem with articles like that is that you get this sort of global sense that, businesses are repatriating everything from the cloud. No, they're looking at some that are not running well on the cloud and thinking, is it in the right place? What do I need to do with it? Maybe I need to bring that one back in for the time being until we've redeveloped it in a different way. So it's again, he had the author of that didn't really think that one through. Again, it's like anything else. In order to get everything on the table in such a short period of space in terms of the article he actually wrote, he's got to be a darn sight cleverer than he has been.
Yeah, and it says again, I think this is kind of part of the part of this should be repatriated. It says don't just focus on cost, consider each workload's requirements. But that's not something you do halfway through or after. This is something that you do before you migrate. You do an assessment, and then you do that kind of, you work that out before you migrate. And then the other one said, AI workloads are best kept in the cloud. Now, I can tell you there's a guy called Mitko Vasilev, who's a CTO. I think he works for he has his own company, Mitko X. But he's quite prolific on LinkedIn. And I will tell you exactly that that statement clashes directly with what Mitko Vasilev says about AI. He actually says you should own your own, make sure you own your AI. AI in the cloud is not aligned with you. It's aligned with the company that owns it. And to a degree, I agree with that, especially if you're kind of in that market sector that needs to have, sovereignty, and you have to go through sort of regulatory hoops and things like that. So that clashes with the author's statement directly, in that he's saying, oh, your AI workloads are best kept in the cloud. Not necessarily.
No, I mean, there's all sorts of performance issues as well you have to bear in mind, and where's the data, and how are you pulling that data backwards and forwards and into the model, and ownership of the data in an AI, all those sort of things. It's we keep coming across it. We're going to get these headlines that everybody jumps on and tries to make something of, but it's a complex arena. But again, business has got to get its head around some of these things, and I think it's it's more important than ever. I mean, we've been challenged with that sort of link between business and the IT department for as long as IT's been around, long as technology has been around. And maybe we've got to start hitting some business leaders around the back of the head, saying, would you get your head around this? Because we've beaten the IT people up and saying you need to be able to communicate with business in a way that business understands. And I think a lot of them are trying to do that, but it's it's a bit like it's a bit like CrowdStrike. You start talking AI algorithms to most business people, it has the same sort of impact of their brain as the CrowdStrike problem had on Windows operating system. Everybody just shuts down. There's got to be a way of getting that going. And I think the time has come to make business leaders, and I'm sure the best ones out there do it already. So this is, I'm tarring everybody with the same brush, but vast bulk are going to be going, oh, well, I've just been told I've got to go to the cloud. Yeah, sounds all right. Oh, for goodness sake, please.
And he does, towards the end, he does mention one of your favorite words, value, when he's talking about big data, running in and sort of using cloud analytics tools, and you can value the value gained in the cloud. He does mention that. And then he does finish off with if you do go back, you'll miss all of these things. So, all the X as a service, cloud security, and that's it. That's all it says. You'll miss the infrastructure service, the IIS and the PaaS and the SaaS. And you'll miss the cloud security because yes, cloud security is infinitely better than data center. But then he stops there, and that's it. That's all you're going to miss. So I don't know. I just wasn't very.
No,
it doesn't. Yeah, it's a weird one.
Let's forget the article and move on, I think, because it's not doing justice to the importance of what's going on at the moment in terms of the way systems are being developed, the way business relies on those systems, the impact it's having on us, the whole way we live, and that's not doing that any justice whatsoever.
Yeah, and I mean it does list out the sort of the cloud virtues, like scalability, programmable infrastructure, security again, and so on. But just kind of, I just find it very disappointing. It's kind of more like clickbait, and for something that's supposed to be in the FinOps section, it doesn't even mention the word FinOps or cloud cost, management or anything like that.
Yeah.
Hey, if you are enjoying the content, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That would really help me out. Thank you. Okay, so let's move on to the third of our topics. So the HashiCorp State of the Cloud Strategy Study 2024 with Forrester. Now, this is titled as Connecting Cloud Maturity to Business Success. Yeah, interesting. Okay, so 2024 maturity model is one of the topics in the agenda. You got things like cloud investment, skills of employees, successful cloud infrastructure strategy, adopting platform teams or internal developer platforms or portals or IDPs, as it's called. That's kind of more around the platform engineering space. So I'm seeing a lot more about people talking about platform teams and IDP, robust security postures, and Gen AI for the future as well. Now, the article itself has got a huge exec summary. I mean, I got lost just reading the exec summary because it gave you like the usual exec summary paragraph, but then couldn't help itself to list out all of the other charts below it, and that's not the full article. That's like the summary, of the article. But yeah, and there was a number of key recommendations that it lists out as well, which is also quite interesting. What did you think about it, Paul?
I was not exactly overwhelmed by it. It said an awful lot of things you would expect it to say. But it, again, and I don't think this is clickbait particularly, but the sort of title about strategy, there was very little about strategy in that.
Yes.
Very little about strategy. And also,
I think you and I talked about more about strategy in the last hour than
there's almost nothing about strategy. So there was a sort of, they jumped straight to the outputs, if you like, of the report. Yeah. Rather than spending some time saying, what were the important things from a strategic perspective they should be doing, and how do we measure that? So I found that slightly distracting. The other was, again, they talked about for business benefit, and it was about 2 lines near the end of the report that said, if you're in maturity, they're reporting 85% met their business targets or exceeded their business targets. The less mature ones only 55%. That was the sum total of the business benefit statement. So you think, you put this thing out there about strategy and business benefit, and then you spend all the time showing the various charts and I was sort of, and this is where my nerdishness comes in, that I've been involved in a number of maturity model developments over the course of my lifetime, and I'm a great follower of a guy called William Edwards Deming, who, he was famously said, "In God we trust, everybody else needs to bring data," and he was actually, he got involved in maturity models. He got involved in, the Japanese followed a lot of his procedures for their total quality management approach, their sort of Kanban, and based a lot of that was based on Deming. And so every time they were doing this, I was thinking, what were the questions or statements you were posing to the people you were asking that elicited the responses as they're mature? There were one or two. There were about two or three charts where actually you've got maybe a snapshot of the way in which they phrased the questions. It should never be a question; it should be a statement. And so I just got frustrated because they jumped straight into those, and I'm thinking, well, that's that you're sort of making the well, that's they do this because they're mature, and I'm not even sure you understand that whether they're mature or not. They happen, the platform engineering one was interesting. Yeah. It's not a given that mature organizations will go for platform engineering.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I was desperately looking to see how they structured the questionnaire or the survey, because I was worried that it was almost giving us the answers that HashiCorp wanted to see.
Well, funny you should say that, because I was going to just say I have the solution for you, Paul, which is all of HashiCorp's approaches in terms of these surveys or anything that they put out is very much based on their solutions, and their solutions are always around infrastructure because that's Terraform, and security because that's Vault. So their kind of lens on the world, and even if you look at their cloud operating model, it's based around four of their solutions. So again, Terraform, Vault, and some of the other like Nomad and so on, some of the lesser known kind of solutions that they have. So a lot of the stuff that they've kind of done here is, I found it not only academic, in terms of kind of high maturity, companies, and they did do it as a kind of a high maturity company and a low maturity company. And the high maturity company, they were doing a lot more, around, things like FinOps, for example, or cost management. Well, yeah, of course they will, because they have the ability to invest that, and they have invested a lot in the cloud. So they're looking at, for example, the cloud waste was kind of, 91% of those organizations found it, a cloud waste as a problem. Well, yeah, because you're using more of it, because you're a high maturity enterprise, and therefore you've invested a lot more in the cloud, and therefore you're clearly haven't done your FinOps properly. Again, go back to strategy, and we would expect to see that. And again, things like multi-cloud. So how many people are using multi-cloud? Well, 62% of respondents said they're using multi-cloud, and that's an increase, in cloud, and there was an increase of cloud investment of 66% this year. Well, again, for high maturity organizations, you would expect to see that, right? Yeah. So again, quite academic, I think, in terms of the numbers. There was nothing in the numbers that kind of made me kind of fall off my seat or something in shock and horror about it. But like I said, it's very much focused on security and infrastructure.
Yeah, and you're right. It was almost like sort of post-rationalization of what it should be, but there was very little around what makes an organization, or an IT organization in this case, maybe, or a business organization, mature.
Yeah.
And it's about people, it's about process, and it's about technology, and it's about culture, but people's the culture thing. And, I wanted to say, when they were talking about the shortage of skills and that mature companies had better skills. Yeah. Is it because they've got really mature processes that everybody loves, or because they pay more? You
just get the right person in there.
Yeah. It's just, there was so much of that going on. But like you, there was nothing particularly that I wanted to take issue with, in the sense that, that's fine, it all makes sense, and yes, you should aspire to these sort of things, to do that. I just thought that the actual underpinning process and the underpinning science, if you like, behind it was fairly obscure, to put it mildly.
Yeah, and like I said, in things like the cloud investment section, the cloud investment continues to grow. There was a section on that, and it said, multi-cloud. Yeah, 62% of respondents said they're using it. Okay, we talked about the cloud waste. Sort of, 91% find it a challenge. So that's a huge FinOps opportunity for all the vendors and global system integrators.
If I was a company that was deemed as being not mature, I would like to have seen more that says, what are the steps I need to take to push me up the maturity model? Because there's a 5-level or a 7-level maturity model, and there should be very, very clear steps that say I need to do that, and that to move from level 3 to level 4 or level 4 to 5 or whatever the levels are that they use. It's, and again, it's using maturity models probably in a rather casual manner here, which is not helpful because you're going, yeah, great. Oh, and you can imagine somebody looking at it and picking one or two things saying, oh, if we did this, we're going to be more mature. But if you pick the wrong things in the wrong order, God help you,
Yeah. So then again, quite similar sort of data around the high maturity and enterprises need skilled employees. So again, expertise shortage, 64% of them, I think, said, yeah, we have an expertise shortage. Again, we know that already. Low maturity firms said 71%. Well, yeah, that's why they're low maturity, because they're struggling to get the right people in, to move them up the chain, so to speak. So again, in that section, talking about skilled employees, I didn't really see anything new, in that. It was quite academic again in terms of the data. The one that maybe kind of caught my eye a little bit more was what drives successful cloud infrastructure strategy. Again, back to infrastructure and only infrastructure. And that mentioned strategy, and it listed out like 6 or 7 sort of, focus areas for the high maturity organizations. And the top one that they listed was security. So 81% of them said security. Infrastructure scaling, 75%. Uptime, interestingly, 75%. So maybe people are learning a little bit about that. Budget, so clearly want more budget, 75%. Staffing at 73%. Regulation and compliance, I guess because of a lot of the stuff that's kind of coming in recently, 72%. And visibility into the cloud infrastructure, another 72%. So what's that? Observability and monitoring?
Well, I would guess so. It's not clear from looking at it, but
exactly.
There's always been this challenge. It's an area of research that I've looked at a lot, which is, the more you go to the public cloud, the bigger the gap across the network is that, that you need to close, where you don't own the infrastructure. Therefore, you've got to work with the cloud providers. They've got to open up. You need to capture different types of data from different parts of the, and so yes, but all of those, and again, they're all in. It was like everything was sort of in the 70%. So it was like, well, so everything's a challenge, isn't it, guys? It's like, yes, we know it is.
Yeah, we know it is.
What is it that you have to do on a daily basis to move the thing? And that's, for me, is, so this is a marketing exercise to say, hey, you need to focus on these things because they're really important. But actually, it doesn't help organization. It doesn't help end users say, how do I move from level 1 to level 5? What are the things I need to do? If HashiCorp really wanted to be useful to its end users, you'd say, we have a way of showing you how to move from step 1, from level 1 to level 5. Here's the way it works. Oh, and Forrester will, get the consulting or whatever. But that just seems to be I don't know. It was, I think I agree with you. It didn't say anything particularly surprising or things that we didn't really know. But again, I just felt it was, a poor use of maturity models.
Yeah. And just to mention a couple of other ones. So success factors, cloud strategy success factors was a section. And it said, again, this was focusing on the high maturity organizations. Or just before that, is low maturity organizations are focusing on budget. Yeah, okay, so you need more budget to make it happen, that's fine. And then figure 10 in that section said, has cloud infrastructure helped your business? Now, 68% responded yes, 22% said no, and there was another section there, but those are the two important ones. But again, focusing purely on cloud infrastructure.
Yeah.
And again, for high maturity organizations, I'm not that surprised in terms of just looking at the infrastructure. But again, nothing in terms of, return on investment and sort of, your overall value and so on. Yeah. And things like scalability, availability, agility, and so on. I didn't see anything in there about that.
Yeah, it's you're right. It's too narrowly focused on infrastructure, and you're going to struggle to get, if you just do that, to get somebody to say that's the benefit that we've really had out of this as a business. I'd say I'd be fascinated to see the actual questions they asked, but.
Yeah, that would have been interesting. Yeah, and then the other sections I think go on to talk about, platform teams, as we said, and IDPs. So standardize and scale your cloud management practices via platform teams. That makes sense. And there was also a section on generative AI for future of security and infrastructure. Adoption rates, again, not too surprising there. So adoption rates are high for high maturity organizations. No surprise there.
Yeah.
Because they have the deeper pockets and they'll always win out. And then the 40% of the respondents said that they're implementing it. Okay. And then 15% they said they had implemented it. And again, not surprising, 30% are in the planning, still in the planning. So as we said before, I think we've talked about 2024 being the year of pilots and POCs for Gen AI.
Yeah, I think again the danger of what they were saying in this report made it feel like Gen AI was much more prevalent in the business, and of course it's not. I'm sure your AI channel will start to debate that and see some of the stats that are coming out, from. McKinsey's interesting one. There's a McKinsey report out there that's looking at trends and where things are, and AI was one of the things. And I'll dig that one out because it very clearly said, AI is very much Gen AI is very much at the sort of developmental stage, and the real, and it hasn't got beyond sort of chatbots and a few other areas that are quite small at the moment. So
yeah. And by the way, thanks for giving away my future channel plans there. I appreciate that. I'll have to edit that bit out.
I'll give you a plug. You can pay me later.
Okay, all right. So I think we're there in terms of the this particular report. Okay, so yeah, it'll be interesting to actually hear from you guys who are watching, listening to this video, whether you guys have been affected by CrowdStrike. What was kind of your thoughts on it? Are you doing anything like, repatriation? Is that kind of being considered seriously in your organization, the customers that you interact with? What about FinOps and stuff like that? Is that kind of cost management of interest? Or indeed, really any of these sort of things that we've discussed today? So feel free to make some comments. Really appreciate your thoughts. That would be useful to get as well. So don't be shy to do that. Always nice to get some interaction and see what people are thinking as they watch these videos. That would be really cool to do. Paul, thank you as always.
Pleasure.
Been, as always, insightful and bringing some stability and sensibility to a lot of these things that you and I go back and forth on. Again, I've mentioned this before, but it's worth mentioning again. Paul and I go back and forth on WhatsApp and emails all the time. So we actually have offline rants about all of these things a lot more. You're just kind of seeing a glimpse, a window of the conversation that Paul and I have in these videos.
Yeah, we're very nice to each other on these, really, aren't we?
We are a little bit. Maybe we should get a little bit more controversial and kind of get a loggerheads on it or something. All the links of all the stuff that we've talked about will be in the description of the video. Yeah, let us know what you think, and thank you guys for watching. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel to support me. You may also want to check out some of the other videos on this channel.